Allow me to introduce my friend, the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Israeli Embassy in Washington, Eliav Benjamin, who will offer some remarks. Eliav, please. I'm sorry about that. Thank you, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. It's definitely a tough act to follow and a tough act to proceed before Ted speaks with the next panel, which is not less important, and I'll address this as well. So it's a pleasure to be here in Chicago and with you all, and thank you, AJC, for organizing this. And again, of course, congratulations also for forming your new Center for the New Middle East. I think a good testament to AJC's commitment, interest, and involvement in the region, which is nothing new to any of us sitting in this room, but I think it's a very, very clear message to the region, apropos, if you want, the Abraham Accords that Ambassador Nides related to earlier. Thank you, AJC, also for taking the fight against anti-Semitism, which I'll mention a bit later. And thank you for basically serving as the foreign ministry of the Jewish people, globally, worldwide, for many, many years and for many years to come. So as AJC is a nonpartisan organization, Israel also is a bipartisan issue as far as we're concerned, and we work both sides of the aisle. And we make a point of doing that. We do this tirelessly and effortlessly from the embassy in Washington and our consulates around the country, and of course from the foreign ministry as well. And we do our best to make a point of this. The shared interests, shared values that we share with the United States of America are something which we try and highlight as much as possible. And it is true today as well. It's true with the challenges that we have, both from within and external. If I look back at the Biden-Harris administration over the past nearly 4 years now, I can't but not be full of gratitude and thanks for the ongoing and unwavering support, and especially over the past 319 days since the war against Hamas. And let me be clear, this is a war against Hamas. This is not a war against the Palestinian people. The ongoing conversations, the ongoing visits, whether it is President Biden, who came in, I think it was the 5th day of the war, came to visit Israel in an unprecedented manner. Secretary Blinken, who was in Israel just yesterday. I've stopped counting the number of times that he's visited the region. And of course, the entire team. And of course, and how can I not mention, the enormous support on the military and defense side. Through General Kurilla, the chief and commanding chief of the Central Command, who's just visited Israel now, I think, for the 3rd time in about 2 weeks. The unprecedented presence after deployment of military assets to the Mediterranean and to the entire region to send a very clear message to Iran, to send a very clear message to Hamas, to Hezbollah, and to anybody else out there. As President Biden stated very early on in the war, a message of don't get any bad ideas. Don't even get any bad ideas of trying to redo what you did on the night between April 13th and 14th, with Iran launching hundreds of projectiles towards Israel. And we saw the response led by the United States and allies, and of course Israel, in thwarting this attack. And we will do so again if needed. And we know that we are standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States, and we know that the US has our back in this regard. Thank you also, and let's not forget, the unprecedented and unbelievable aid package that went through Congress, both sides, initiated by the administration, initiated by President Biden, something which we are extremely grateful for, which helps us not just in fighting the war now, but in sending a very clear message to all those enemies out there, and in being able to tackle any challenges that we'll have going forward. And yes, there are challenges. First and foremost, and our great panelists spoke about this as well, when we speak about Iran, overarching, putting the strings in so many different ways, just looking for any other excuses to attack. Now trying to use the excuse of an archi-terrorist, Ismail Haniyeh, being taken out of the equation, and trying to use this as an excuse to attack Israel. And let me just be clear, Haniyeh was one of the worst terrorists within Hamas. He was not a moderate negotiator for a hostage deal. He was one of the worst terrorists, and the world is a much better place without him. The same applies with Shoker, with somebody known, if you want, as the chief of staff of Hezbollah up north. The world is a better place without these people, and Israel will do whatever it can to protect itself and to make Israel a safer place for everybody. And this is not just Israel's war. The war against Hamas is a war of the free world against evil, and the free world against terrorism. Today it's in Israel, tomorrow it could be anywhere else around the world if terrorists and the evil side do not get the message in a very clear manner. When we set out for the war against Hamas, which, let's just remember, we did not choose, and it started on the most horrific day of October 7th, 6:29 a.m. Israel time. And we've all seen the images, we all remember the stories, the testimonies, and unfortunately, there are only too many out there, including in this country, who are either in denial or at least have forgotten what happened on October 7th. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, not just to remind ourselves, but to remind everybody out there, yes, including all those demonstrating around the streets of Chicago as we speak. We had 4 objectives in mind, and they are still there. The same objectives, they haven't changed. To make sure that Hamas never has the ability to govern Gaza ever again, that Hamas never has the ability to orchestrate terrorist attacks in the way that it has conducted from Gaza ever again, to bring about the stability and safety to people across the country. And I'm sure many of us in this room have family, friends, or at least people that we know who are either fighting or living in these neighborhoods, whether it's down south or up north. And 4th, last but definitely not least, to bring about the release of every single hostage to bring them back home. And we will do everything that we are capable of in order to do so. We just saw this overnight now with the rescue of another 6 hostages, unfortunately deceased. And yes, there are other hostages that have been murdered, whether it is on October 7th or during their time in captivity. We will do everything we can to bring every single one of them home. And we can't do this without the support and the unwavering support that we have seen and that we are sure that we will continue seeing also going forward. Antisemitism. Just unbelievable and incomprehensible to understand how, in the wake of October 7th, we've seen such an exponential rise of anti-Semitism in this country. You've seen this in campuses. We're all experiencing this when we go to synagogues, to community centers, when we just walk around the street, whether it is with a kippah or without a kippah on our heads. And it's something that we are grateful for the Biden-Harris administration for setting out with the strategy for combating anti-Semitism and for implementing it, but we're still not seeing the numbers go down. And I think it's on all of us, and I'm saying this from an Israeli perspective, as a moral duty of the representative of the Israeli Jewish state, to see how much we can all do more to combat and push back against anti-Semitism. And this means all of us together. It's Israel supporting you all, it's you supporting Israel, it's now on anti-Semitism, it's now on Hamas, it's now on Hezbollah, Iran, on so many different challenges. And we are in this together. And it's only together that we can win, internally and externally. B'yachad nenatzeach. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm pleased to introduce our second panel, Addressing Anti-Semitism in America. Joining us on stage are Steve Benjamin, Senior Advisor to the President and Director of Public Engagement, Katy Joseph, Chief of Staff for the Office of Civil Rights, and North Carolina Congresswoman Kathy Manning. Moderated by AJC CEO Ted Deutch. Ted, the floor is yours.
Thanks, please.
Which order do you want us to sit in, Ted?
Do you have an order that you'd like us in?
Just this way.
way?
is fine.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you both for being here. Steve Benjamin is on his way. We will jump in and welcome him when he arrives. First, I just want to take a moment. Eliav, thank you for joining, and thank you for the very powerful words. It means a great deal to us that you took time to be with us, and as you know, we are always standing with you. Thanks. And quickly, Jason, masterful job as always, and to Haley, and to Tom, and especially to Chicago's own Brad Schneider. We're really grateful for that excellent conversation. And Eliav really set the table for this next conversation. We gather, let's acknowledge what Congressman Schneider talked about. We're going to jump in, talk about anti-Semitism on campus, but let's start with loud protesters who take to the streets with chants and flags and symbols and posters that aren't peaceful. They're certainly not progressive. They are calls for the destruction of Israel. They side so often in these images. They side with terrorists. They celebrate as a martyr, as Eliav says, the killing of one of the worst terrorists alive. That's the setting that we're gathered in, and both of you, in your own ways, are so committed to fighting against that. Let me just make sure everyone understands how fortunate we are. Katy Joseph, Chief of Staff for the Office for Civil Rights for Department of Education. Former acting director of the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the Department of Education. An experienced advocate and attorney, Katy was previously director of policy and advocacy for the Interfaith Alliance, the only national interfaith organization committed to protecting the integrity of religion and democracy in the United States. Katy, thank you for being with us. And Kathy Manning, our dear friend, Representative Manning, is the Congresswoman representing North Carolina's 6th Congressional District. She is co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, the vice-ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and before serving in Congress was the board chair of the Jewish Federations of North America. I also just wanted to acknowledge, I don't know if he's still here, but I wanted to acknowledge Kathy's colleague, Congressman Mark Vesey from Texas who is here, if he's still here. Mark, thank you very much for joining with us this morning. And Mark, thank you for your ongoing support of Israel and standing with us in the fight against anti-Semitism. Thank you. All right, let me jump in. Katy, anti-Semitism was rising before October 7th, and AJC was an active participant. We wholeheartedly, in drafting, wholeheartedly endorsed the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. Since October 7th, though, we've seen this dramatic increase in pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic protests around the country. The tent encampments, the occupation of academic buildings, demonstrations that left many Jewish students feeling vulnerable and isolated, the intimidation of Jewish students, some fearing for their safety, concealing their own Jewish identities. Now, AJC, in the face of all this, recently launched a Center for Education Advocacy to really uplift the work that we do in all of these areas. And before turning, as we will, to enforcement in the Office for Civil Rights, you ran the Department Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. As we prepare for fall semester, and everyone here is worried about what we're going to see happen across campuses, the possibility of encampments, the expected anti-Israel, anti-Semitic protests on October 7th. What's the Department of Education doing? What sort of proactive initiatives are there aimed at addressing anti-Semitism on college campuses right now and fostering a safe and inclusive environment where Jews can feel comfortable as Jewish students?
Great. Thank you so much, Ted, and it's great to be here today. I appreciate the space to have this conversation. It's certainly not one that is limited to K-12 schools and college campuses, but it's certainly one that is felt far beyond the reaches of our schools in this particular moment. I want to take it back to where you started with your question, the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. This was the first ever national strategy to both recognize that anti-Semitism is real, that it is a problem, and it is an urgent challenge that needs to be addressed on a national level. That is remarkable, and that is a credit to President Biden's leadership long before this current moment. So every agency in the federal government, in the lead up to the release of the national strategy in May 2023, developed a number of commitments. What were we going to do to make sure that we were using our federal programs, our initiatives, our enforcement powers to protect Jewish students, to increase awareness of anti-Semitism, and foster environments where Jewish students and all students can thrive, particularly in the context of the Department of Education? So, among other things, we launched an anti-Semitism awareness campaign. That included notifying and informing every school in the country, K-12 and higher education institutions, about civil rights protections under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and their obligations to satisfy Title VI. We also held webinars, trainings, and ultimately launched what would be a series of visits by senior leaders both within the department and also across the administration to schools and campuses across the country to address the rise in anti-Semitism. That first visit happened to be in September 2023. We could not have imagined just how much this work would change a few weeks later. Throughout our work to advance the anti-Semitism awareness campaign and to meet the current moment, we have always centered student voices. And we've been consistently engaged with Jewish community leaders as well as leaders on campuses and students themselves about what they're seeing and experiencing to make sure that we are being aggressive in our response and that we are being appropriate, that what we are putting out, the messages that we are sharing, the enforcement that we're undertaking is actually meeting the needs of students on campus. So if I can, I want to share 4 key themes that we're hearing from Jewish students right now, and particularly as we're heading into the fall semester. The first is that for most Jewish students that we're talking to, they don't recognize their experiences in the larger national conversation about anti-Semitism on college campus. They feel like they're being talked about, but not being talked to. And that is really strange to them. I spoke to one student who had just been home for Passover, and this was the topic of conversation around the Seder table. And she got back to campus, and she was worried about finals. And yes, she is on a campus where there has been a lot of activity, but she wanted to focus on her studies. And it's hard to do that when so much of the conversation is about, will I be safe, being who I am, and moving around campus as my whole self. The second thing that we've noticed is that many students have encountered anti-Semitic tropes in the classroom, or they have been harassed on campus, or heard stories from others who are harassed on campus, and they don't feel like they have gotten the supports that they need from the adults in positions of authority to address that. They often have to be their own self-advocates. And one of the other things that I do want to flag here is that they feel like there are assumptions being made, and this is endemic to how we think about anti-Semitism, assumptions being made about who they are and what they believe in spaces that they go into. So students are making difficult choices about whether I wear my Jewish star when I'm walking around campus, because people will assume that I feel a certain way about the conflict, or that I have a connection with the conflict that I may or may not have, and that is very hard to hear. The third thing that we've heard from students is the role of external actors in making environments on campus worse. These are students, again, who are trying to go to class, who are trying to get to Shabbos services at Hillel, and they are encountering external groups that are on campus trying to make a moment out of their experience. And it is very hard for them to ask honest questions about that. And that brings me to the fourth theme of what we're hearing from students. They want more space to talk. They want to be able to ask questions. They feel that the environment is extremely polarized, and where they want to learn, they feel like they can't even begin to ask those honest questions. And that is concerning. As we think about taking the temperature down and providing spaces for students to meaningfully engage, that is front of mind for us, as well as the enforcement work, where things have gone beyond the pale to ensure that campuses are responding appropriately to those flashpoints.
Thanks. Just Representative Manning, before I turn to you, one quick follow-up. You talked about the department's goal in part of being aggressive. And we at AJC, in our Campus Global Board, remarkable students from around the world, we hear a lot of the same concerns that you raised. And I think what they want to know, what we want to know, yes, the goal is to be able to engage in those kinds of conversations. It's very difficult to have those conversations when there are people standing on campus refusing to let you pass because you are a Jew. What is the aggressive action that the department is planning for this upcoming semester to address these concerns that you've been discussing?
Absolutely, I'm happy to get into that, but I do want to welcome Mayor Benjamin.
Oh, hey man, nice to see you. Pleasure, welcome, thanks. I'll give you 30 seconds and then we'll.
Sure, absolutely. So under this administration, we have opened more investigations on the basis of shared ancestry discrimination, including anti-Semitism, in K-12 schools and on college campuses than in any other administration. And I'll talk about both what our enforcement powers are, what that looks like, the types of resolution agreements we're reaching with schools, and the meaningful impact that it will have on students' ability to be their whole selves on campus in just a little bit.
Okay, great. And Mayor, if it's okay, I'm going to ask the Congresswoman a question. We'll come right back to you.
That sounds
Thanks.
like a plan.
I didn't see you sneak in, sorry. Representative Manning, you're a member of the House Education and Workforce Committee. You're co-chair of the we're grateful, all of us, as expressed by our surrogate, for your service on that committee. You also co-chair the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Antisemitism, a group that I have particular fond feelings for my time in Congress. How's Congress responding to this rise in anti-Semitism? We've we heard about this whole of Congress approach that was announced by the Speaker several months ago. How's it impacting the work that you do? There's legislation that you're working on. Can you speak to what's happening on the Hill?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you, Ted, for convening this panel. Thank you, AJC, because AJC has done extraordinary work, and you had guidelines for college campuses to follow even before October 7th, and what college campuses should be doing, what university presidents should be doing. It was very useful. In fact, I used it in crafting the questions that I asked college presidents who were brought before the Education and Workforce Committee, and it was very helpful. I also want to thank Ted. When he let me know that he was leaving Congress, I was just bereft, although I knew what a good choice he was. But he then asked me to step into his shoes to chair the Anti-Semitism Task Force, and I'm grateful for that, because that's been such a strong focus of my work and since you left Congress. And of course, this all happened before October 7th. So when people want to blame anti-Semitism on, well, I don't know how you blame it on Israel being attacked, but this problem has been growing for years and years and years. And we actually reached out to the administration well before they issued their strategy, because anti-Semitism was rising at such an alarming rate, and asked the president to pull together an all-of-government task force to address anti-Semitism. We were so grateful that they issued their first ever national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. And when that strategy was introduced, I pulled all the pieces that were in the bill for Congress to do into a bill with the help of AJC and the ADL, and that is the Countering Anti-Semitism Act. And I want to talk about that bill for just a moment, because we introduced that bill. It is comprehensive. It takes a wide variety of steps to promote 12 different agencies of the government in enforcing efforts to combat anti-Semitism. One of the things it would do would be to appoint someone at the Department of Education, a high-level person who would report directly to the secretary, to monitor anti-Semitism across K-12 schools and colleges and universities, and to come up with strategies to combat anti-Semitism. It would also create a national coordinator to combat anti-Semitism who would report directly to the White House. And though that's just two of the many things that this bill would do, the bill now has more than 60 co-sponsors, 30 Republicans, 30 Democrats, and I have a list of Democrats waiting to get on the bill, but I'm trying to keep it bipartisan, so I'm asking each of my Democrats to find a Republican who's willing to co-sponsor the bill so that we maintain the bipartisan nature of the bill. I raise this because I have asked the Speaker to bring the bill to the floor for a vote. His response has basically been silence. When I have pushed it, what I've been told is it needs to go to the various committees. There are many bills that the Speaker brings to the House floor without having those bills go through committees. Now, one of the committees that this bill would go to is the Education and Workforce Committee. And for those of you who have been watching those hearings that we've had, where Chair Virginia Fox has brought in all these college presidents to grill them on what they've done on anti-Semitism, she refuses to bring the bill to our committee even for discussion, and her objection to the bill is that it would create additional positions to address anti-Semitism, and she objects to creating any additional governmental positions. The other thing that the Republicans are doing right now, they've cut more than $10 million from the budget of the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, which is the department that is, as we've just heard, works to combat anti-Semitism and to address the claims that are brought and try to get those claims resolved. So having these hearings, it's important, because what we have learned, sadly, is that we have far too many college presidents who've been caught flat-footed, I think is the kindest way to put it. They have lacked the courage and the willingness to do what's necessary on college campuses to stop the protests, to keep Jewish students safe, but it's much deeper than that. There's been no education on the college campuses about what really has led to anti-Semitism, what Jewish tropes are, and what really is behind the protests. So we've seen a wide variety of problems on our college campuses. This bill would do an enormous amount to help address across the government, and it is disappointing that the Republicans are blocking any efforts to bring this bill to the House floor. I'd like to just mention also, 60 Jewish organizations signed a letter requesting that this bill be brought to the House floor. That's 60 Jewish organizations from the far right to the far left, and I challenge you to find any other issue that 60 Jewish organizations agree on, even when the holidays start. We have trouble agreeing when they start. But this is an extraordinary coming together of the Jewish community. And so when we hear that the Republicans are all over this anti-Semitism issue, they're all over it when the cameras are on. But when it comes to doing the tough things that actually need to be done to help us combat anti-Semitism, there are empty words and lack of action.
Well, Representative Manning, AJC strongly supports bipartisan efforts to combat anti-Semitism. We're grateful for your leadership on this Countering Anti-Semitism Act and the way that you've approached it in a bipartisan manner. We continue to urge the House to bring it up.
Let me just add one more thing, Ted. I'm sorry. I want to add to what the Department of Education has done, because they've really been extraordinary, and I want to give a shout out to the head of the Office of Civil Rights, Catherine Lamont. She's just been fierce in going after the anti-Semitism, those who are not standing with Jewish students. And the Department of Education just issued a very comprehensive guideline for colleges to be following as schools reopen this year. And I've read it carefully. It's a very good document, and it calls on the college campus, the university presidents, to understand what's going on their campuses, to review all of their policies, and not just their codes of conduct, but their time, place, and manner codes for where campuses can take place, to enforce their rules on a timely, diligent, and consistent manner. It's a really strong document. So I want to give a shout out to the Department of Education, and I want to give a shout out to both Kamala Harris, who was instrumental in getting this strategy, helping the strategy be in its launch, and also to Doug Emhoff, who has taken on the issue of anti-Semitism as a hallmark of his work as the second gentleman.
Thanks. By the way, all of these issues, our Center for Education Advocacy is working closely with the administration, with Congress, with university presidents. If you'd like to learn more, please talk to our team. We've been joined by Steve Benjamin, Assistant to the President, Senior Advisor to the President, and Director of Public Engagement. Prior to joining the administration, Mayor Benjamin was the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, from April 2010 through December 2021. He has served as President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, President of the African American Mayors Association, Vice Chairman of the Global Parliament of Mayors, and has received a slew of accolades, including, importantly, an alumnus of AJC's Project Interchange, our educational seminar to Israel. Welcome, Mayor Benjamin. I'd like to just pick up where Katy and the Congressman left off. As anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is increasingly used to justify violence against Jews and Jewish institutions, the Biden administration put out this national strategy. How is the national strategy being used to counter this anti-Semitism that really is just masquerading as something else? This is what we've seen since 10/7. We've talked about it. We feel the impact of it. We've talked about the impact on our community more broadly. How's the strategy being utilized now to address this?
Sure. No, thank you, Ted, and thank you all for accommodating my tardiness. I went and did a hit for CNN at the convention center. Bad idea. So I have about 2.5 miles worth of steps already this morning to get out of there and over here with you. I do want to say thank you to my colleagues in the administration, the great work they've been doing at the Department of Ed. Congresswoman, thank you for your incredible leadership to be able to get bipartisan and bicameral support. Real action is so important in the fractured environment in which we live. I'm going to put my glasses on. I don't need them, but I can't see without them, so I'll put them on. The leadership is articulated just by the Congresswoman just now. Our president, who's been unapologetic in his support of the state of Israel, the intolerance for the anti-Semitism we've seen all across our country, but across the world, but certainly manifested in such ugly ways on our college campuses. Our vice president as well, and I've been sitting side by side in any number of meetings with the second gentleman, soon to be first gentleman, Doug Emhoff. You can applaud for that one. And I will tell you, he'll be the coolest first gentleman in the history of the country. At that. So just an amazing leader. And we've had, as Ted said, I've served as president or vice chair of every mayoral organization, can be in my role at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Our focus was on innovation, infrastructure, and inclusion when I served as president of the organization. We started off my term as president of the organization taking a bipartisan group of mayors to the southern border to make sure that we had our voice on the record on the separation of children from their families. We then took a delegation of bipartisan mayors to Montgomery, Alabama, to talk about the history of American human chattel slavery and how it was a stain on the history of this country. And then we took our leadership, a bipartisan group, to Poland, to Auschwitz and Birkenau, to make sure people understood the greatest tragedy, not just of the past century, but maybe of human history, the Shoah, helping people understand that if, in fact, we do not lead from the front, and we're very intentional and putting strategies and plans together that span 100 different action items, 24 different agencies, requiring people to work and hopefully manifest itself not just in a national strategy that is intergovernmental, but also a full community approach, but also hopefully law making its way through Congress, intersectoral as well. It's been moving forward. I know that many of us, I'll be candid, are very concerned as the academic year begins. My daughter returns to college tomorrow to Spelman College in Atlanta. And I think a lot of folks are waiting to see which of our campus leaders in particular are making sure that they're doing everything they can to protect our Jewish students from this rise. And we've been seeing a rise in anti-Semitism, not just in the past year, not just since October 7th, but over the last several years. But making sure that we're prepared to make sure that our Jewish facilities and places of worship are safe, our students are safe, and that everyone can learn and have an opportunity to get delivered to the God-given potential in the place it's supposed to be. Particularly our college campuses, the very best years of these young people's lives. So we've been leading from the front, and I really want to thank AJC for its incredible leadership in helping fashion the strategy. But particularly as we come up on the anniversary of October 7th and the holy days, I think everyone's going to have to make sure we step up and with that much more vigilance in ensuring that everyone's safe and respected. But it's going to require, Congressman, as you said, a whole lot more action and leadership and not just lip service from so many.
Thank you. And I know we're running a couple minutes late, but this is fine. Mayor Benjamin, I just want to make the point as we're approaching, and I appreciate you bringing it up, as we're approaching the anniversary of October 7th. October 7th is absolutely, as we know, it's a day of mourning for our community. It is also a day of resilience for our community. And as we're thinking about preparations for October 7th, particularly standing up to what we expect to be, in too many places, awful anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist protests and marches, that I hope Congress and the administration will work with AJC to also view it as that day of resilience and talk about the incredible, positive, prideful actions that Jewish students on campuses across America are engaged in every day. It's exactly what you talked about, and we'll look forward to working with all of you on that. Katy, just since you teed this up in your last response rather, we've seen Jewish students attacked and targeted, go back to Poland, hurled at students, threats and wishes that October 7th would happen 1,000 more times, 10,000 more times, Jews being shoved and harassed, Israelis being literally chased across campus. So back to being aggressive, what is the Office of Civil Rights, how is the Office of Civil Rights approaching this, especially in anticipation of this fall? Yes, what you described is important. That's what we need to strive to achieve. But the things that we expect will happen, the people who will be engaged in them need to face repercussions. What's the department doing about that?
Yeah. If we only provided resources, it wouldn't be enough. If we only did enforcement, it also wouldn't be enough. So we are pairing them in equal measure to make sure that leaders are stepping up, that they have the tools they need to be able to foster a safe and inclusive learning environment, and where they fail to meet their obligations under federal civil rights laws, they feel the consequences. I was raised hearing stories from my grandfather when he was a student at Princeton, and he would have Shabbos dinner with the Einsteins. And that wasn't because he was some great...
Those Einsteins.
Those Einsteins.
To be clear.
And it wasn't because he was some great physics genius, but it was because there were 6 Jewish students on campus, because there was a quota for the number of Jewish students at any given time. And the Einsteins made a space for those Jewish students to come together. They were not so observant, but they understood just how important it was to have that space. We're in a very different moment now for Jewish students on college campuses. We are not at a time where there are quotas for Jewish students, but students are still hearing messages that make them feel like they cannot be their whole Jewish selves on their campus, and that is unacceptable. So under Title VI of the Federal Civil Rights Law of 1964, the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education is the law enforcement agency to ensure that no Jewish student experiences anti-Semitism in their K-12 school or on their college campus. So we have enforcement power over the language in the bill. It's always fun. What is the language in the bill? So under statute, Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. We have for many years understood national origin to include shared ancestry and ethnic characteristics. So that can include harassment that a student experiences based on actual or perceived practices or beliefs, assumptions made based on how they dress, the yarmulke that they wear, or slurs or other derogatory language that's hurled their way. It can also include citizenship or association with a country with a particular religious identity or a dominant religious tradition. So, in past years, we have always received shared ancestry complaints. This year, or in the last year, we have opened over 100 investigations for a total of about 145 investigations open today. Under the past administration, they opened 28 investigations in all 4 years. 28 in all 4 years. We're at 140, I believe it's 147 today. We have also reached almost 3 times as many resolution agreements with campuses as under the prior administration. We are closing more cases, and we are doing it just as quickly with exponentially more complaints coming in. So we receive a complaint, and there's a 2-part investigation that happens. First, was there harassment on the basis of shared ancestry? And second, what did the school do about it? And this is often where the rubber meets the road. Did that school rise to the occasion or not? We've reached a number of resolution agreements recently, and we're able to be in a place where we can talk about what we're actually seeing on college campuses. When things are in investigation, we can't get into the details of it, but we're seeing instances, say, where a report goes to a university of language on campus that made Jewish students feel unsafe, and it was sent to the PR office. It was seen as a press issue, because what if somebody covers this and it looks bad for the school? Or there was individual counseling provided, but there was no broader conversation about how is this harmful to the larger school community and why is it unacceptable to engage in anti-Semitic tropes on this campus. These are not unimaginable expectations that we have for school leaders, and as Congresswoman Manning pointed out, we recently released a guide to help walk them through what is the checklist, what is our expectation for them going into the fall semester, and make no mistake, we will be there on their campuses if we receive complaints about ongoing anti-Semitic harassment where schools are failing to meet the moment. We have the power to withhold federal funds if they refuse to comply with Title VI. The last time we did it was in the 1970s, but we've done it before, and as my boss, Assistant Secretary Lehman, loves to say, we'll do it again. Because every student deserves to be free from discrimination on their campus.
Thank you very much. It's a very powerful message, thank you. Katy, just as we wrap, I have a question for each, Mayor Benjamin and Representative Manning. Mayor Benjamin, we at AJC devote a lot of our energy to building relationships with other communities, strengthening those ties in the intergroup and interreligious spaces. And after October 7th, I think it's fair to say a lot of us were sorely disappointed with the silence we heard from some of our partners. Among your other responsibilities, you're essentially one of the chief bridge builders in the administration. What can we do to help everyone understand that when anti-Semitism is present, it's never just the Jews who are impacted, that it impacts society at large, and how can we get that message out there?
No, I'd encourage each of you. It's easy to remember. It's White House OPE, the Office of Public Engagement. Maybe go online and sign up for our newsletter to find out ways in which you might be able to be involved with our office. Our Jewish liaison, Shelley Greenspan, sends out notices fairly regularly to encourage community input into work that we do. But a significant part of the national strategy is indeed this allies challenge. The number of my dear Jewish friends, many of whom helped shape the arc of my career in public life. Some of you who may be familiar with South Carolina may remember Senator Israel Lurie, a blessed memory, who helped introduce me to the challenges of anti-Semitism early as a teenager. The deafening silence is what I heard from so many of my friends, that folks that they'd worked with for years, supported for years, had the backs of for years, were just not there. And I believe we're coming out of that. I think as we step into this academic year and we watch maybe some protests grow again, that we can continue to beat that back, but it does require a sense of intentionality. White House OPE, so our Office of Public Engagement, just so those of you who may not work with us as much as Ted and others might, is the Office of Public Engagement. So it's our job. We don't deal with elected officials, or I don't have mayors anymore, or we don't work with governors or even Congress. We work with civil society. We bring our policy experts to the table with subject matter experts, those of you who have lived experience. And it's our job to do, as my grandmother would say, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. And if indeed you do, it helps you take in thoughtful, constructive criticism about how the sacred trust, this relationship the president and vice president have with the men and women they serve, how we can do our jobs better. And we have literally every aspect of civil society represented through the liaisons in our office. But we need to hear from you about the things that we're doing well, so we can replicate them and do more of them, and the things that we're not doing well. We need to know that as well so we can improve. But one key part of the strategy is indeed this allies challenge that Shelley and others are leading right now. So I know that the community has felt so alone. I know that everyone has had to dig that much deeper and go places that we should never have to go over this last year. But if, in fact, you have some existing relationships, you need to lean on some of those friends and pull out of them their better angels and have them step up in ways in which, and my daughter's going back to school tomorrow. We have another one right behind her who's a warrior herself, a high school senior. I shudder at the idea that our babies don't feel safe and loved and welcomed in places in which they're supposed to be in this microcosm of society and living their very best lives and growing into these wonderful citizens who need to understand the phenomena and forces of the universe right now as college students. They have to live in fear and terror, or that those in our communities might have to do so as well. So know that you have an unabashed ally, as I think he's made clear in President Joe Biden and in Vice President Kamala Harris, and that there are a whole lot more of us in the White House who stand side by side with our Jewish community, stand side by side with Israel, and look forward to learning more from each and every one of you as we go forward. God bless you.
And finally, Representative Manning, you have a remarkable history of leadership in the Jewish community, which I described in the introduction. This is who you are. It's such a fundamental part of your life and the way you live your life. This has been a heavy conversation. I would like to end on something more positive. What is it that makes you hopeful about the future of Jewish life in America?
Well, I guess it's Jews. We have faced much worse adversity throughout our history. And we have managed to survive. They have not gotten rid of us yet. And in today's world, we have, when you look at what's happened to Jews, and I had one of my colleagues on the House floor say to me, "Can you explain anti-Semitism to me?" This was like on one foot. And I said, well, anti-Semitism is the oldest form of hatred and discrimination, which blames on the Jews whatever the evils of a society has been. And it goes back from the Crusades to the Inquisition in Spain. And he stopped me, he said, "I thought the Inquisition was against the heretics." And I said, "Who do you think the heretics were to the Spanish Catholic king and queen?" So there have been times throughout history when Jews have been attacked, and it's more often than not been either by the government or with the approval of the government. Well, today we have our government on our side, and that is what is different about what's happened in this country. And that first national strategy to combat anti-Semitism, the comments of our colleagues, and the willingness of 60 of my colleagues to be co-sponsors of the Countering Anti-Semitism Act. And let me also say that my co-chairs on the the Bipartisan Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism, my co-chairs, for the most part, are not Jewish. They are allies who stand with us, and they're allies on both sides of the aisle. So this is what makes me think that if we just keep fighting it, if we reach out to our allies and we explain to them how we're feeling in these difficult times, and how not just the anti-Semitism that existed before October 7th, but how October 7th was traumatic not just for Israelis, but for Jews all around the world and all across this country. We need to explain to them how this is impacting us and what's happening to Jews, because if we don't explain it, many people don't see it, they don't understand it. So that makes me optimistic about the future, the support of this administration, the support of the future Harris administration, I feel very positive about what we can do to continue to combat anti-Semitism. And let me just say that the anti-Semitism has always been there beneath the surface. What we have seen now is it has exploded. And because we now know what's out there, we have a greater ability to fight against it, not in the shadows, but in daylight. And we have to continue to fight this fight because we need to reclaim our place both in this country, and we need to make sure that Israel, as a strong Jewish democratic state, can continue to exist with the partnership and friendship of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Manning. AJC, my remarkable colleagues at AJC work closely with congressional leaders, with leaders in the administration every day. We are fortunate to be able to do that work in partnership. We do not take it for granted, and we are so grateful to have all three of you on this panel with us today. Thank you very much. Thanks for making that.